Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics previewing the first round of the OUA playoffs. The quarterfinals are here. We have three awesome games to break down. We'll get into all those and no doubt in the nature of the conversation, talking about all sorts of things OUA youth sport football related. But first and foremost, Tom, my dear friend, how the heck you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well, my man. I'm doing well. All the sourness and the feelings of being down because the regular season is over is now completely gone because we got playoff football. The most exciting games of the year are going to happen in the next few weeks here. So I'm jacked up for this.
Yeah, and what's really neat is we have two rematches. So we have the direct feedback of how these teams faced off and fared from this previous season. And we have one matchup we didn't get to see, which is arguably just as tantalizing when you get to now. I mean, the same way we do the matchups during the regular season of like, well, here's the new iteration of these teams, but playoffs always bring a bit of a different beast out of these teams. Tom, we're going to start off. We have two 1 o'clock games, one 3 o'clock game. We're starting with the matchup that we saw from our last game day live from the Evan Hillock homecoming in McMaster, now taking his talents back to his other home in London, Ontario, where your McMaster Marauders are rolling in to the Forest City to take on the Western Mustangs. Tom, obviously the last time, we saw these two teams match up, it was what, I guess about like 3 weeks ago. And it wouldn't do pretty. It wouldn't do pretty. And honestly, 61-26, a lot of points late, ugly game. But a game that, starts with Keegan Hall leading his Marauders down the field, a Ryan Barlson pick six, and it's the class quintessential, it's you have to do so much to beat a team like Western or Laurier, these really top teams. And when you start off like that, kind of akin to you think about the Carleton game when they went to Western and you had what was it? A like fumble, a touchdown, like they go down like 21-0 so quickly off of just like somewhat like low percentage plays, like the odds of them happening all in succession is crazy. So we see that score 61-26. We know last year with a MAC team that was very similar to the one they have now. A couple guys moved out of that program and a couple new faces, a la, Jackson Taylor and all the great things he's doing, but a very similar team overall. And they fare really well going into London. Is it fair to say, and here I am, the proclaimed by yourself, Mac Hater in the virtual room here, fair to say that 61-26, I mean, it is what it is. The score is what the score is. Might not truly indicate just what the gap is between these two teams this year.
Yeah, see, I'm kind of split when it comes down to this, to be honest with you. And like you being the Mac hater, I am the Mac alum, the Mac lover, and even myself, 61-26, it was a tough game, and we watched it the entire time, and Western dominated. Let's not forget, Mac came off their bye week. They had a bye week going into this game and then played super poorly. Not poorly, I would more so say that Western just dominated in this one, but still, like, you had a week off, an extra week off. You had 2 weeks of Western week, if that's how you really want to put it, where everybody should be locked in and ready to go. And obviously things didn't go. Now, I still think that your assessment, I would say, yes, I don't think that these teams are this far apart. I think that this game is going to be a good one, but it certainly has the potential. If it's going to be a blowout one way, it's going to be a Western blowout. That's for damn sure. So it's going to be a big test for the Marauders, 100%. But typically, at least in the past couple times when they've done it, Mac has played pretty decently going down to London in the regular season game last year and then in the playoff game in 2019, obviously.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't know if this is the moment to transition into the conversation because we had a really great question brought up on our Twitter timeline of like, when was the last true upset that we've seen in the OUA? And it probably was that 2019 Yates Cup championship with Mac picking up the win in London, as you were highlighting. With this one, again, looking at the matchup from what we saw last time, because it was brought to my attention through a London Free Press article that came out following up the Western win to end their season against Windsor, that Ethan Dolby and Seth Robertson, and we had spoken to Seth at that MAC game, and he had indicated that he'd been dealing with a bit of an injury, but it was apparently cited. I couldn't find the article myself, but cited in this article that Dolby and Robertson might be a bit questionable. That comprises 3 of those touchdowns that they scored. Dolby rushes for 1, has that awesome play action wheel route that he gets. And of course, our guy in Seth Robertson finds the end zone. And, with Western, it's just a plethora, a wealth of riches, the depth of talent that they have that in some regards, we've been seeing this young guy in Dasani McIntosh really come onto the scene strong. And obviously, you still have guys like Mohsen Jamal, Braden Masarian, former MVP in Keon Edwards, and guys like Keanu Yazbek. From that standpoint, what really, because beyond just the, okay, Western fumbles every play, Mac connects on every major splash play. If they are down Ethan Dolby and Seth Robertson, just kind of looking at these teams at full force and recognizing that Western clearly has the edge, whether that's 61-28, whatever the final was, matchup is truly indicative of the gap. Let's say that Dolby's down. Let's say Robertson's down. Is that enough? Where does that bring the gap to? Is that now more feasible now? Because obviously that defense for Western certainly is still supremely scary to have to deal with, even if the offense takes a bit of a step back, as they no doubt would if those 2 guys aren't up for this weekend.
To be perfectly honest with you, I don't know how big of a step back that's going to be. I mean, Ethan Dolby suddenly you go from a 3 running back backfield to a 2, and the 2 is Keanu Yazbek and Keon Edwards. Yeah. Keon Edwards being the previous MVP winner, and Keanu Yazbek, who in my opinion is playing better than Keon Edwards is right now. So you still have 2 of the best running backs in the backfield. And yes, Seth Robertson being down is a massive blow because Seth does some outstanding things. I've been a fan of him ever since I really saw him. But then we see Dasani McIntosh and what he does last game. He only has a couple catches, but they're only these 475 yards. So with Western, and this is something year after year after year after year, it's never they lost their star player, now we can take advantage of this. It's always a next man up mentality, and the guys that they have for the most part are going to be pretty solid. I don't know that this is going to be a huge step backwards in any sense of that, even with those 2 key guys being injured, because Evan Hillock has shown that he can get the ball to anybody as long as they're open, and he will. He's got a great arm, he's got great vision. So if you're Mac going into this, I don't think to begin with, Coach Brady is going in there to the Mac defense saying, hey, Ethan Dolby and Seth Robertson are down. We got them now.
Yeah.
I think the whole time you're, if anything, prepping for if they do actually come back in so that you're not caught off guard if they do actually dress in this one. And B, you're just prepping for the fight of your life, really.
Yeah, no, totally. And again, even if those guys are down, and yeah, Seth Robertson, the all Canadian who wasn't last year, right? Just when you look at what he did and just his numbers just consistently been so strong, and Dolby coming on really strong, which has been great because another local kid in that area doing solid things in that program. It's still, to me, just how good this Western defense is. And so let's flip the script, because obviously for Mac, that passing attack is really strong. They've started to do some really nice things, as we've been seeing with Micah Duchesne, and which was a big surprise, not only because Mac's struggled on the ground game for a couple of years now, but Braden Kelly goes down. We know that, our guy and Noah Amaril's down. We're thinking, man, oh man, if you ever had a chance to run the ball, that's gone out the window. Shout out to this young kid, or I don't know exactly his stats, but all OUA football guys are young kids at this point. In my eyes, Tom, we're old men. Shout out to him for being able to get a bit of a ground game going. But we obviously know when you have one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Keegan Hall, and you have the plethora of weapons he has, and your Jackson Coolings, your Everett Reeds, your James Priestner, your Jackson Taylor getting his first OUA playoff experience, and Nathan Denkers, that at the end of the day, Mac's ability to have success is going to start in the passing attack, and anything they get on the ground is going to be based off of that, draw plays, things like that, which we've seen them do, using the pass to set up the run. This secondary for Western, one of the best in probably the country. We've talked about it, whether it's Ottawa, Laurier, some of these other top teams. Western, no slouch. And we obviously saw in that MAC game 2-3 weeks ago, the return of Kojo Odum. He's getting his sea legs back. We're obviously seeing this linebacker, just supreme athlete, in Ryan Bartleson, really showing us some solid things out there. And as we've talked about for a while now, Richard Adu in the slot playing half with Jackson Finley over the top and everyone else that makes that defense so spectacular. We've seen this matchup and we've seen, Keegan move the ball a little bit. What are the things you're looking for the most when we look at the strength of that MAC team, which is the passing attack versus, it's hard to pick a strength for Western, there's so many. Arguably, I think that secondary is the strongest thing about them, which is saying something. From that standpoint, where do you see the opportunities for MAC to be able to take advantage or to be able to move the ball? Because certainly if Western shuts down their passing game, then MAC doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell.
No, for sure. And that's definitely something that I'm sure the Western defense is going to be focusing on. You stop the pass, you stop MAC. But if you think back to that, the previous game that they had between McMaster and Western on their homecoming, that first drive is exactly how I would hope that McMaster is going to attack this, meaning you're going down the field in short bursts and methodically. Take your time when you're on the field. Do quick crossing routes. Those out routes that we saw against York, live and die by those. Slants over the middle, absolutely. But your ability to control the ball, hold the ball, and drive the length of the field is going to help every asset on your team. It's going to tire out the Western defense for sure, but more importantly, it's going to give your McMaster defense time to rest, because drawing out and owning the ball is Western's bread and butter. And when you have to go down on a 12-play drive to try to stop Western and they score, and then your offense goes out there and goes 2 and out, woo-wee. That is a recipe for disaster, and that's exactly what Western does to all of these other teams here. Is they control the ball, they move the ball down the field, and they score. If MAC wants to get in this, I think that's the type of methodology that I would go into this one. Slow but sure passes down the field, controlling the ball as best you can, honestly utilizing it like you would in a run game. In the run game, if you get 5 or 6 yards, that's a win. It should be the same thing in the pass right now. Really, hey, you want a seam route for number 2? You want to go up against Richard Adu, or you want to get into a zone where Adu passes it off to Jackson Finley? You're going to have a bad time. Now, what I will say is, of course, these guys are going to shoot the shots down the field. Keegan Hall is a gunslinger, and he's going to go for it, absolutely. I would not be surprised, and maybe I haven't heard anything from the MAC guys, but maybe I'm digging stuff up for Western, but I would not be surprised if those out routes that we saw from Aiden Nemeth turn into a wheel route down the sideline where everybody's antsy trying to jump on and get that pick 6, and Nemeth just turns it up and you find that spot in between the corner and the safety for a big gain. So I'm thinking that this is going to be a methodical approach by McMaster, really owning the ball as best they can on offense with a couple of deep shots in case Western's sleeping. But this defensive secondary for Western, they don't sleep very often.
Yeah, totally. Like they're getting diagnosed with insomnia, and they're never sleeping. And arguably, even if MAC catches them on one of those out and ups, you'll be damn certain that they're not gonna you're not gonna fool them twice on that. Because realistically, and I love your diagnosis of the fact that they can use their pass game in the same way we traditionally talk about. Hey, run the ball, eat up the clock, dominate time of possession, this, that, and the third. Try and keep it as a low-scoring game. So if you have an opportunity for a big chunk play, it might be more significant if you're able to limit how much time Western's offense stays on the field. But again, to that point, there's no rhyme or reason where I think Western has to play that aggressively on defense. And, even if MAC is chewing up the clock, Western just has all the priors to have confidence that, all right, shoot, maybe we don't get as many possessions, but we'll still score on most of the ones we get. And at a certain point, this team's going to have to get aggressive. And when they do, we're sitting there waiting for you. And we've obviously now started to see, well, not started, we've been seeing all year a much better performance from this Western front seven than we saw in years past. Not that it was poor by any means, but 18 sacks on the season, where we're going into the playoffs last year being like, like that's really, again, if you're nitpicking a team that is a top ranked team in the country, you're going to look at, well, hold on, are you getting home when you're playing coverage? This year, they're top five in sacks. They're right on the cusp there with a team with Queens, who we, scream from the to the high heavens how great that front seven is, which it is. So again, Western has no need to do anything but sit back, let their front seven, their box players take care of business. And, surprise, surprise, not that we have to end the conversation. I'm certainly going to go Western at home on this one. And let me at least throw this your way, Tom. Not that I'm going to assume you're leaning that way, because you are the Mac man in the house, but you also are a smart man. So I know we'll see how the brain and the heart duke it out. What does, in the assumption, playing off of my pick here, that Mac does lose? Obviously, we want to talk about the wins in football that don't always reflect on the scoreboard. And we were joking with a few people on the York side of things after the game last week of like, hey, you know what? Let Mac go get the crap kicked out of them by Western next week anyways. Yes, making the playoffs matters. Yes, it's a major step for both these clubs in York and Mac, more so for York. It's been obviously a lot longer time since they made the playoffs, but Mac's been in a bit of a drought. But we were reflected on that Waterloo Laurier game last year, where Waterloo sneaks into the playoffs and gets what, like 60 dropped on their head by Laurier. Was it really worth it at the end of the day? And again, there's part of me that hurts my soul saying that, because, like, hey, another chance to play football. It's another chance to get better. So from that standpoint, the getting better piece that does come from those opportunities, forget what happens on the scoreboard, forget all of that. Mac loses this one. What are the things you want to see them do in a playoff game in Western that you're going to say, man, okay, they didn't pick up the win? And again, I'm not even assuming that's where you're going, but they didn't pick up the win. But man, oh man, we're seeing the right things for this team moving forward.
Well, first and foremost, anytime you play against Western, if you can't stop the run consistently, you're going to have a bad time. So, first off, if you can stop the run, and I'm not even saying consistently, if you can stop the run 50% of the time and really create headaches for that Western O-line in particular, I'd call that a massive win. Having the wherewithal, because realistically, at the end of the day, especially with Western and their power game, where here's an offensive lineman pulling over. Here's a fullback pulling over. Oh, actually, by the way, here's also another wide receiver coming into the box as well. Have three guys at the point of attack. And then behind all of that is Keanu Yazbek or Keon Edwards. And you're like, oh, wow, this is terrible. One of the best ways and one of the things that they teach you, certainly at the very beginning with a pulling guard coming over, is that defensive end, you got to blow that guard up. Or if bare minimum, you got to hold your ground as best as possible, because if you get blown out, then that's where the gap is. So if you can control that initial kick out, if you can just hold up that offensive lineman so that you create some kind of a blockage where everything's supposed to go, I call that a big win, defensively at least. Evan is going to find his guys. He's going to have at least another 200-yard day for sure, but it's limiting where he wants to be able to go. Take away the deep ball, make them go methodical, make them stay beneath, and then come downhill and make some tackles. So I want to see something from the defense there. Limit this high-powered offense as best as possible for sure. On the offense, there's a lot of young guys that we've seen. We've obviously detailed the offensive line, one fifth-year player in Taylor Burns, and everybody else is a first and second year. So seeing them consistently get better, and I think we have seen them get better all year long, seeing the progression there is obviously going to be really encouraging for next year, certainly. I want to continue to see the receivers as well. Jackson Taylor, what is he going to be able to do? We saw a couple of drops against York. We saw a couple of drops against Western last time that they played. Are those going to turn into catches? Are you going to be that guy that can really be relied on? Hey, Aiden Nemeth made a name for himself last week. Jackson Cooling is always going to be somebody on the radar. Jackson Taylor can utilize that and get free, even if everybody else is saying, oh, you know what, he's had a few key drops. He's not the guy. If you become the guy in this game, in a playoff game in London, there's no higher stakes. There is no bigger game than a playoff game in Western. So who comes to play? Who comes to play? Who wants to play? Who makes big plays? That's really what I'm going to be looking at here. And McMaster, man, Your back's up against the wall. Everybody is assuming that you're not just going to lose, but you're going to get blown out. How will you respond? What's your character? What's the heart on this team? We are going to find out on Saturday. That's for sure.
Yeah, I really love that, and I think for me to answer that question as well, it's as you said, the line play, especially with that young O line, and then yeah, talking about Jackson Taylor. Hey, young man, you're showing all the signs of that next dude as far as OUA receivers. Here you go, man. Here's your first playoff game and your first game at Western. So you kind of had that band-aid ripped off of having to take on Western in somewhat the comfort of your own home, though they certainly didn't make it comfortable for you. Going into their house, playoff game, that place is going to be rocking, and just what a learning opportunity that is going to be. So from that standpoint, total agreement of where those positives can come from. But again, in my eyes on it, that's where you have to win the day, because you're not going to win the game. It's Western at home. Tom, who are you taking?
It's a head versus the heart. Absolutely in this one. The one thing that I will say before I end up making my pick, I don't know if you ever experienced this at your time at Guelph, but the worst part about a big loss that happens in the regular season like this one is that now when you watch film, 90% of the film that you watch is this blowout game. So you've put it on the shelf. You said, hey, you know what? We're not going to worry about that anymore. It's the next play. It's the next game. You got to take that off the shelf, and you're watching the hell out of each and every single play. Hey, you know what? We want to get to this. If we see this kind of coverage, if we see this kind of blitz. So you're thinking at it at, here's a new play, or here's something else, or here's a caveat to what we're doing. But this is the front against what we just saw. And in this play, we got our butts kicked. And you have to watch that over and over and over again. And that is the worst. My own experience in that, in our home opener in 2014, we played you guys. And so all we did was watch the 2013 regular season loss over and over and over and over and over. We hated that game field by the end of it, and obviously ended up working for us. But that's the worst part of this whole week, is that's all you're watching. That's all the film that you're seeing here.
Just having to relive those demons. Tom, in the midst of that, you said we're going with the head, yes?
We are going with the head. I've got my McMaster shirt on underneath. I've got the helmet in the background, but it's the ponies in this one. I'm sorry, fellas. It's Western taking this one at home.
Yeah, it's a hard one to not go with. As we said, the last true upset we probably saw was this not exact circumstance, because, well, it was a Yates Cup, but Mac going into London, and hey, big number 13, Josh Cumber, man, oh man, you had some big plays as a rookie in that one. So I know you're coming in probably rewatching some of that tape, getting fired up. Guys picking off balls going to 6 foot a million Brett Ellerman, looking at these receivers for Western being like, no big deal, let's shut them down. And obviously for a lot of those guys at Mac who are in their last game, just awesome to see them give it one last hurrah in the maroon and silver.
It's maroon and gray.
Maroon and gray. There you go. Moving from the Forest City to the Royal City, where we get a matchup we haven't seen in roughly 2 years. It's the Ottawa Gee-Gees heading in from the nation's capital to take on my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everybody's Guelph Griffins. We have an awesome matchup here. Last time these two teams faced off, and again, it's 2 years ago, so the point of this exercise is somewhat meaningless, but there's really one connection I want to bring out of this. For starters, it was a 46-10 drubbing Ottawa put on the Guelph Griffins in Ottawa. First and foremost, it was Ben Miracle as the quarterback of that team, throwing 303 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, for why when we went into this year thinking that he's healthy again, and with some of these receivers that we liked, and then it all kind of fell apart. One of the reasons that we were saying that this was a surprise to us. Ben Miracle has shown some really strong things. That was a version of the Ottawa Gee-Gees that had Amilcar Polk, that had JP Simonkinda in the backfield, and had a wealth of receivers. On the Guelph side of things, you were seeing, I believe it was the American kid, Jake Helfrich, at quarterback in that experimental year where they were rotating quarterbacks left, right, and center. But a backfield with Donovan Malloy and Isaiah Smith rushing 16 times for 100 yards. So I say all that to start this off and saying, if people are watching old tape of games, young Mr. Smith, dial up that tape, and whatever it was that you were doing and just getting yourself going in that game. And it's an Ottawa defense that was still very strong. They had James Peter, Max Carbonneau in the middle of that defense, Emmanuel Bogia gone. A lot of those guys in secondary. Isaiah, you're watching that film and you're just looking at that garnet and gray and saying, oh yeah, this is the day I'm going off. I'm finally getting it going. But that's where I want to start off with, because Tom, ultimately, that game's somewhat meaningless. 2 years later, a bunch of different people on these squads, a whole different host of coaches for the Guelph Griffins. Both these clubs looking really strong. Guelph coming off the week 9 bye, Ottawa coming off a near picture perfect performance at home against the U of T Blues. What are your first impressions looking at this matchup?
You talk about improved offenses, especially from that last time that they played. I don't think that's how the game is going to go in this one, fellas. You and I were both talking about this previously, going, man, this is both of these squads. And I've got some numbers here in front of you as well, because it hasn't been all year. We've seen, obviously, Guelph show flashes of that real greatness, but I think they've really come alive in the last 3 games here. So in the last 3 games, Guelph is averaging 472 yards of total offense and has scored 120 points in 3 games. And those have been, yes, the last game, it was against York. York is good, and it's not like they blew the top off in that one either. And then you look over at this Ottawa offense, and Guelph is averaging 472 in the last 3 games. Well, in the last 3 games with Josh Jansen, they're averaging 470. Just 2 yards behind. And points-wise, they've scored 105 in the last 3 games. So both offenses that are at the very peak, the best of the best that they have been. Ottawa had their bye week, not this past week, but the week before after the Panda game and on Thanksgiving. And Guelph had theirs this last week going into the playoffs. So both squads, as healthy as you're going to get, you might see a couple of guys. I would not be surprised, especially with Coach Belfay, if he's looking out and saying, you know what? No disrespect to the U of T Blues, but they're not exactly a very strong team. Max Mellifont, why don't you take another week of rest? All of our other guys who might be on the cusp, why don't you take another week of rest? Why don't you come back for a playoff game? If I'm Coach Soria, if I'm Coach Barry looking at this, I'm saying, let's prepare as if everybody is healthy, because that's a lot of time off that these guys have had in the past couple of weeks, and that's a good chance for them to come back in this one. But both offenses operating at the best that they have been all year long.
Most certainly. And for all that and a couple other things that we'll get into, this Ottawa team scares me. It scares me quite a bit. And going back to that theme of upsets, I think we settled on looking at this game of saying if Ottawa goes into Guelph and picks up the win, we're calling it an upset. But I'm going to ring the upset alert bell, because that's a live possibility for this game. And you mentioned those numbers. And then you also look at the fact that defensively, Ottawa's given up about 23 points a game. Guelph's given up 25. And there's that special number again for the Ottawa GGs that makes that defense so special, which is that within the number of yards that teams are gaining on them, only 176 are coming in the air. Only them and the Western Mustangs give up less than 200 yards per game in the air. And on the flip side of it, in the terms of the rushing attack, yeah, those numbers are a bit higher up, and it's that chicken and the egg. Are they higher because teams aren't even daring to throw the ball on them, so they're just rushing the ball, or is it that teams are just rushing the ball because they know, hey, they're genuinely not that strong there, so we might as well do it? Hard to say. So we know that they have a lot of these strengths. And again, guys like Riley Hildebrandt and Kevin Anderson, some of those linebackers, Daniel Briere, Jackson Brashear, really strong there. The numbers, though, that again, if you're going to really because I'm going to start talking about why Guelph's going to do some special things, and the same with Ottawa. The last thing, as far as why I'm very scared, is where's the number here? 125 per game to 60 per game. Tom, any sense of what numbers on earth I just threw out there? 125 per game to 60 per game.
penalties.
Penalty yards per game, Guelph being first in the province, averaging 11, giving up 125 yards, over a touchdown's worth. And the Ottawa GG's pretty well tied with Queens, but the number one in terms of fewest penalties, giving up 6 per game, and averaging 60 yards as a result of it. It would be interesting to have the split to see if Guelph's a little cleaner at home, because I think about the penalties in that York game. I think about the penalties in that U of T game, 2 road games for them. Maybe the splits are a little different. It would make sense. You're a little more comfortable at home, whatever. But that's a major, major gap. And it's not just pulling numbers to be able to say, oh, well, on third down when it's fourth and greater and Guelph's in a 3-by-2 set, they're like, this is a legitimate stat. This isn't just trying to find something. That piece of it scares me. Let me stop right there. From that standpoint, this is a team in Guelph where we really like the leadership. We really like the veteran leadership as well. Do you think that that's something that we're just going to be able to see them clean up? Because at a certain point, an 8-game sample size isn't everything. It's a pretty short season when it's all said and done. But at the end of the day, you're not going to take away from the fact that, Western scores the most points because you say, well, it was only 8 games. No, we trust in the sample size we get. It's a season's worth. Is it fair to be concerned about it? Or do you feel like that's one of those things that the guys can just be like, okay, just everyone like flip and relax. Just chill out. Just don't get penalties. Is it that easy, or is that become part of a team's identity that can be harder to break from?
So I think in certain scenarios, depending on the kinds of penalties, it can be a product of who you are. I mean, a lot of the times when we were looking at those Laurier penalties at the beginning of the season, we're seeing guys who get fired up, who are taking like an unnecessary roughness or something along those lines. And not to say that they're, a cheap team or a bad team or anything, but that passion, that anger, that everything, the emotion that goes into that means if I've got a guy and I'm blocking him, sometimes I don't always hear the whistle when it's going, including their quarterback who had a couple of those, Mr. Elgersma. And when it comes to Guelph, for the most part, at least, a lot of the penalties that I've been seeing against them have been self-inflicted. Well, all penalties are self-inflicted, but the ones that I really mean are, hey, you're going offside a bunch, or hey, you got a holding call, or you got things of that nature, that those can be cleaned up. That means, hey, you and I both know as an offensive lineman, if you're holding a guy outside of your body frame, that's a hold. If you've got him inside your body frame, that's a clean block. So that the difference between those is just moving your feet. If you move your feet properly, and I think that might be a bad example to use because I don't know how many holding penalties like the Guelph O-line has really gotten because they are damn good, but you understand my meaning. Receivers don't go offside or line up properly. No illegal formation. Understanding, hey, you know what? There's a guy who's out of bounds now. Let's leave him alone. Don't take that unnecessary roughness call and things of that nature. So I don't think that going into this game, you're like, well, that's just who Guelph is. They're going to get a lot of penalties, whatever. I think a lot of those penalties can easily be fixed and can be taught. And I know that coaching staff is outstanding at Guelph right now. And I know that that's going to be a focal point for them most definitely. And I'm sure it is in every single game. Hey, can't afford to have all these penalties here. We got to make sure that we're cleaning things up most definitely. So I'm not ringing the alarm bells at that as much. Certainly it's something to look for, but I really think that is fixable going into this one. Now, you might have something that you want to get to as well, but I have a question for you in going into this. So once again, you brought it up beautifully in sample sizes and looking at that. And in this scenario, at least in one case, you're going to have an even smaller sample size than the 8th. You and I have been talking about the top tier quarterbacks in the league. And I think regardless of positioning or whatever else, that you and I can both agree 1, 2, and 3 in the OUA are Taylor Elgersma, Evan Hillock, and Keegan Hall.
That's a bingo. Yes.
Tristan Aboud and Josh Jansen, especially in the last few games of the season, have been playing lights out, outstanding football against top tier teams. Once again, those numbers that I read out for Ottawa, 470 averaging, that's against Laurier, that's against Carleton as well. So those are two very good defenses as they're doing that. Obviously, Guelph having the same thing. Where do you rank those two quarterbacks? Even do you have them at 4 and 5 on our list? Or do you have them at 4 and 5, and who do you have where?
Well, Tom, firstly, as we all know, I have a sizable investment in Elijah Barnes Island.
Yep,
So in my,
100%.
I'm looking to, only, double down on that. With that in mind, it's tough because the sample size piece with Josh Jansen is a bit muddied because of the back and forth. I would then go Abood Barnes Jansen. I'm going to put that young kid ahead of him. Part of it has to definitely do with the weapons because though I like what we've been seeing, obviously, in our King and Charles Aslan, the backfield, he's as good a weapon as any of those teams have. And, I'm including like our guys in that receiving core and Vishan Janusis, Kane Stevens, Aslan is outstanding. I think partly though, when I put Abood and I put Barnes ahead, the weapons they have in total, especially in that passing game, I think triumph what Josh Jansen has to deal with. Of course, they're inextricably linked. If you have a great running back, and of course with Charles Aslan, we see him get into the slot a little bit, and then he can make some noise there. But as you were talking about though, so that I will stick with that. I will say that after those three, I'm gonna go Abood, then I'm going Barnes, and then I'm gonna go Jansen. Even with Abood, with Jansen beating Barnes in the head to head. Still, I just love what I saw from that kid this year. But even with that, you think about the way that this Guelph offense has been moving and against an aggressive defense in York, where they were able to take those shots downfield, where it was, the play action and then big Willem Arsenault just down the seam. And that might be less of a viable option. But what I thought was so amazing, and we haven't even really talked about the line play, and we really sort of gave a nod towards the Ottawa D line as a way of saying, like, look, we know the secondary is great, but they still have some good things here. That's where I think things are getting really interesting, because I think about in that York game, some of those jet sweeps and screens where they were just getting the ball into Kane Stevens' hands, into Vishan Janusis' hands, and those hard runners to be able to offset, and with the offset, then your more traditional runs, and the way that Coach Soria uses the fakes, and when all of a sudden Marshall McRae appears in there, when there's so many threats that you can't hone in on one thing. It's just the viability of all that, I think, is going to be really strong. I'm kind of going off the question again. I'll lock in Abood, Barnes, and then Jansen. Where does your eyes and mind take you with those guys?
Yeah, no, I think going into that, it's definitely, I would say that Tristan Abood is in that 4 spot, and it is something of a battle between Elijah Barnes and Josh Jansen. And in my head, having outstanding receivers in this scenario might actually be a detriment to you, because how many times are you able to just lob up a ball and have a guy like a Tristan Reddy, Frederick Hatchie, Kasim Ferdinand come down with it? Now, I'm not saying that that's the entire reason why Carleton was doing their thing and Elijah Barnes was outstanding, but to think about not starting, well, technically, yes, he did start the year off against Western and kind of was thrown into the fire in Josh Jansen, but not being the planned starter going out into this year, being asked to then come in, hey, you got to kind of help save our season here with all of the games that we have. We got 1 win when he comes in. If they lose that they have 2 wins when they come in. You got Laurier, Carleton, and Toronto. You got to win 2 out of the 3 if you want to get there, and Josh Jansen does that. I'm really, really impressed with this young man. I think I'd give it to Josh Jansen over Elijah Barnes, to be perfectly honest with you, with how well that he has been playing and how well he handles pressure in these tight games, going into Laurier and coming out with 400 yards passing. That's pretty damn impressive to travel down there and to get that done. Nothing against Elijah Barnes. He has been sublime the entire year.
Yeah.
But going into this one as well, and I love that you brought up the wide receiver screens to kind of go along that route. Of course, Ottawa's defensive secondary is one of the best, if not the best, in the OUA right now. Their pass coverage is outstanding. Their reads, their draws is amazing. This is going to be one of those scenarios where, yeah, you know what? You're going to see a wide receiver screen. And now, hey, Kevin Victome, how well do you do against Kane Stevenson coming up to block you in space?
Yeah.
Hey, even if you get past him, Vishan Janusis is running the ball and he has no problem running dudes over. He can run over a linebacker, let alone a defensive back. How well are you going to handle the physicality of the Guelph Griffins receivers? Because Well, yes, Tristan Aboud has the deep threat and he can get the ball down the field to his guys. I don't know that those are necessarily going to be as open as they have been against other teams, but a quick slant route, getting the ball in your guys' hands and seeing, hey, even if you do get tackled, you're going to punish a dude when you tackle him again, and let's see how well you want to tackle in the fourth quarter. That's what I'm the most interested in, is how well is this Ottawa defensive secondary? Not to say that they're not physical themselves by any means, but Guelph Griffins and their receiving core, certainly in my opinion, one of the most physical receiving cores that they have out there, along with having not decent, great speed, great catches and abilities that way. So how are you really going to battle against that? Because 100% that's going to be in the game plan.
Totally. And it's just, it's a function. It's not even about whether that defense isn't as great as they've been. They are. It's just that there's a lot of grass out there to cover.
Mm-hmm.
And Coach Soria makes sure that he can attack every blade of that artificial turf seemingly on any play. So if you want to try and keep a cap on that offense and play a bit of a deeper look so Arsenault's not getting behind you, then yeah, there are those shorter looks. There are those jet sweeps that they can use. But then all the while, this is still the second best rushing attack in the whole province, going against a team in Ottawa who gives up the third most rushing yards. So you can also just not overthink it. And again, force Ottawa to have to say, because because this is the thing, if Guelph concedes, hey man, that's a great passing defense. You know what? Sometimes your opponent is going to influence the way you're going to call plays, the way you game plan. I mean, that's the nature of game planning, that you see, well, where are their strengths, where are their weaknesses, what do we do well, what do we know, all that. Even if by virtue of tipping your cap to Ottawa and saying, all right, hey, look, we're not going to take as many deep shots if they open up later on, that we can do it. It's not like when we talked about Mac facing Western, where you say, man, if Mac's passing attack can't get it going, my goodness, is this going to be that much more of a tall task for them? Arguably, Guelph's best opportunity, regardless, is to say, let's pound the rock. I already mentioned off the jump to think that one of the last times that young Isaiah Smith, going back to his rookie year, crossed the century mark against a version of this defense that was similar, same DC if memory serves, and with two of the best linebackers we've seen in the last 5 years, really in this decade, who were playing together there. Three, really, because I loved me some Emmanuel Bogiagian. He was still moving the ball on a day where Ottawa was putting up big points. So you have that piece of, okay, we talk about this all the time. If you're down big, you might be forced into the pass a little bit more. They were still able to say, you know what, young man, Isaiah Smith, you're going to rumble and pick us up some yards to give us a shot in this one. So there's just so many ways Guelph can attack, again, every square inch and blade of grass on that field. And if they wanted to say, let's load up with one of the best O-lines that we have, that there is in the province, with a stable of running backs who can hit you downhill, you can get your Caleb Sargents, your Donovan Malloys, who are lightning quick. And then if you throw in Marshall McRae there as well, and obviously we like what Tristan Aboud can do with his feet as well, it's that which is now, from starting at that point where you look at some of these numbers, you look at how strong Ottawa's been coming onto the scene with Josh Jansen, how great he's been performing, how awesome that secondary is, that defense in general, and that the penalty numbers scare the pants off me. But this Guelph offense is so good. And there's some numbers about the Guelph defense we can talk about as well that I'll want to mention before we move off of it. But allow me, just on the back of all that, to say, yes, I am taking Guelph at home to pick up the win. But again, I will alert people that this isn't, whatever, for folks who might not be watching these teams as diligently throughout the year, don't look at this as saying, okay, Guelph's coming off the bye, they'll take care of business, no problem. It could become a crooked score. I certainly don't anticipate this. I anticipate a lot of points in this game, to be honest. And we already established it. It would be an upset. Maybe we should come up with some rules for like what defines an upset moving forward later on. But yes, it's still Guelph at home here.
The one thing that I'm really interested in, and we talked about it previously as well, is that when you have a defensive secondary like Ottawa does, where you have guys who are outstanding across the board, and Denny Ferdinand and Kevin Victome and everybody else that's in there, suddenly now you can look at them and say, hey guys, Guelph is killing us a little bit on the run. We're going to need you guys to go man to man so that we can sense the pressure. And then they're going to look at you and go, yeah, no problem. Go do your thing. We got these guys locked down. And now you've got saw blitzes. Now you've got twists that are coming with Mac linebackers and the defensive tackles there where they're creating gaps. Now you've got to deal with run threats to say, yeah, sure, go ahead. Go try to throw to your guy in Vashon Danusis. Go throw to Kane Stevenson. We're willing to bet that we're going to lock them down. Whether rightly or wrongly, I would not be surprised if Ottawa comes out and says that to bring more help into the run game, because most definitely, if I'm the defensive coordinator for Ottawa looking at this, I'm going, that's the best offensive line that we're going to play against all year long. They are going to lean on them, and especially Donovan Malloy in the back end. Even if Isaiah Smith isn't back to form or is still dealing with some stuff, Donovan Malloy has been playing some outstanding football and really is the guy to watch in this entire thing. And then, oh, by the way, Caleb Sargent is still able to make dudes miss and get lost in the monsters that they have up front and have the ability to just take off and run with it at any point. So if I'm Ottawa, I'm loading up against the run. I'm betting that we have the guys in the back end to try to hold you up. And what they're going to be relying on most definitely, and like we mentioned it before, get a couple of stops on defense, and offense, go score. Go spread the field. Go use Josh Jansen and that cannon of an arm. And then, oh, by the way, you also have Charles Aslan in here. If you can get a couple of scores quick in this game and then start playing, hey, we've got guys in the secondary here that can really play with some of the best of the receivers out here, this is going to be a long game for the Guelph Griffins, which is why I'm right there with you and ringing this bell and saying, oh, damn, this might be something. But I'm going with the Guelph Griffins in this one, fellas. I don't think that even with those additional threats that I just talked about with potential Mac blitzes and anything else, while yes, if you really wanted to break it down, you could potentially give the edge defensively on a one-on-one scenario between the Guelph receivers and the Ottawa defensive secondary. I wouldn't say that across the board, but you could. I ain't doing the same thing against that Guelph Griffin O-line and the rest of that front seven. If they do send 7-up pressure, that just means it's one-on-ones with the entire O-line across the board. I'm taking those W's. I'm taking Donovan Malloy. This run game is what puts them over the edge. Guelph Griffins take this one at home.
Definitely. And the other thing that I think I just wanted to throw out as well, we talked about how Western was doing a better job than we'd seen in recent years getting to the quarterback. And we talked about with losing a guy like Scott Murray for this Guelph defensive front, even a guy in Yusuf Al-Khalidi, they are 2 sacks behind Windsor. The Windsor Lancers pass rush you in terms of sacks on the year. Windsor with 24, Guelph with 22. It's been a I guess kind of sneaky because again we don't like that defense. So I think in part there's still a bit of the stink of last year and a couple of those games that Windsor did on them in the rush game and then what Laurie did in the pass game. That defense has been very solid. So if you want to, on the flip side, you might be able to say, all right, look, they got a great quarterback back there. They have a great running back. Let's always make sure there's eyes on Aslan. But we feel like we can get home if he wants to try and take any deep shots, whether it's a Gilbert Thibault. If Maxime Melifont's back, we see him try out there. Again, that's tough because that's the guy who'll take the top off the defense. But I think that I know this will be a really exciting ball game. I'm happy we're both with Guelph on this one. We will be in the house, we should note, for this one in the Royal City, checking it out. No game day live that we're doing before perhaps we go into our next matchup, our final quarterfinal game. We have some news about the semifinal playoffs, right, Tom?
Yes, absolutely. Like you mentioned, we will be at the Guelph Griffin game just purely as fans wanting to catch some outstanding football. And in all the games that are happening, even though the rankings would say that Windsor and Queens are the closest to, might be most competitive, I still think that Guelph-Ottawa game is going to be the most exciting. But the news that Zach is alluding to is in the semifinals, the home game that Laurier has rightfully earned in their bye week getting into the playoffs. We will be live and direct our next game day live will happen at Laurier for whoever it is that they play against at 1 o'clock in Waterloo. So wanted to get that out now so that all of our fans are able to hear that. And yeah, definitely very exciting for us.
And it'll be an awesome time. It'll be a similar setup like we did in MAC, where the stands will be behind us. We'll be on the field with the fellas warming up, and just, yeah, really, really exciting for that one. However, we got to figure out who's going to be heading down to the KW to take on the Golden Hawks, and a good chance that one of these two teams may very well be that team. We have the Queens Golden Gales getting on the bus and heading all the way to the end of the 401 under the shadow of the Golden Arches, the team with the blue collar and gold swagger under the tutelage, wisdom, and coaching prowess of one JP Cercelli, aka the Don, with his Windsor Lancers duking it out from a matchup we saw all the way back in week 1. And so beautiful that was a game. It was seemingly the equivalent of the Queens Laurier matchup we had the year prior in 23, of being like, wow, a week 1 matchup to behold. And the one we had this year, it certainly didn't it didn't leave us wanting more. It was a 25-21 final for the Windsor Lancers, picking up the big dub at home, of course, leading towards that 5-0 start that they had. It was Rican, it was Skelton, it's Kasari, it's Zorn, as sort of those main movers and shakers amongst all the other players that are so special. I think there's a really good reason to think that while the identities of these two teams may still be very similar, both in terms of their own identities from that week 1 matchup, and the fact that I think both these teams actually have similar identities to one another. Let's pound the rock. Let's play just absolute nightmare defense, the stuff that nightmares don't even put in offensive coordinators' minds. But there's a lot of still similarities with how these teams are approaching this game in terms of their own philosophies. It's a little bit different than the matchup we saw based on what we've seen of late. Of course, guys that have been injured may be coming back. We don't have all the updates on that. But again, when we look at being Vrikin versus Skelton, Kasari versus Zorn, with Wavy Mamba, with Christopher John, with Liam Talbot, guys like that in the mix, just looking at the offense side of the ball, we've seen a lot of those guys in and out of these lineups for a variety of reasons, as we now have made our way, 2 months since this game.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, when you look at the guys that are here, you see an Alex Vrikin that was in there for his very first start of the season at bare minimum, with a new offensive coordinator and our guy, Coach Nez. And the first time that he gets a chance to be an OC since his Windsor days when he was down there. And so when you look at this, obviously Jared Kasari in the week 1, he does his thing. He goes for 166 on the ground. But the big thing that sticks out to me is Alex Vrikin, 14 for 28, 187 yards, 1 touchdown, and 4 interceptions. And with that, 4 picks, not even getting into the fumbles, 4 picks, and the game is still only decided by 4 points. So how much of that is coming from an outstanding defense and an outstanding defensive secondary that Windsor has here, certainly. And now going into this one, this is, I think, again, we talked about it with Mac Western. This is another one where that Queens team all week long, I'm sure that's all they're watching. You're watching how we played against Windsor and what kind of a fronts that we saw and what plays did we run and everything else. Now, from the start of the season to the end of the season, I know that Queens, and offensively especially, has been getting better and better and better. And while Anthony Leo hasn't been blowing people out of the water with the numbers that he's had, like we've mentioned previously, in the 3 starts that he's had, 6 touchdown passes to 0 interceptions. Even if he's not spreading the ball all over the field, even if teams aren't looking at him like a real legitimate threat all over the place, like a Keegan Hall, like a Taylor Elgisma, Evan Hillock, he's smart with the football. He gets the ball into his playmakers' hands, and he allows them to really do their thing. You give a guy like a Matt Camillo, like a Nico Cuomo, like a Nathan Falcone, give them the opportunity to do something with the ball, and special things are going to happen. I would not be surprised if that's the same game plan going into this one. And I think that Queens is going to be a whole lot smarter with the ball, making sure that they're not giving it away to the outstanding defenders that Windsor has.
And really, it was outstanding defender at the Bobby Springer show. Robert Springer getting the 3 interceptions in that one. Istvan Asibo-Dotsi, another just stellar defender for that team, coming up with the fourth one. And with this matchup, can you look at, the we've talked a few times about quarterback carousels in a couple contexts. That certainly is a way you could describe Windsor this year. And what's just, again, is, when the eye test and the numbers and this back and forth, what's so startling is just as a team, whether it's been Skelton, whether it's been Roy, whether it's been Domovsky, they average the least amount of yards in the air. Of all the teams in the OUA, they've gone a few more touchdowns passing than a couple clubs, including Ottawa, which is actually a little fascinating. But that's just, it's what we keep harping on as far as, like, obviously quarterback play, which then relates to your passing play, matters a lot. Obviously, duh. But I mean, and maybe someone could pull up a stat for Laurier or Western or Guelph or Queens or some of these other top teams of being able to say, like, well, here's where they're actually the worst amongst all the teams. I mean, I guess we did look at how Guelph is the worst in penalties, and that's, again, the thing that really scares me as far as, both this game and their upper echelon talent, where they can take themselves. You can't be the worst in a major thing like that and then be like, it's all gravy. It's, what, like, we can just run the ball so well, especially because some of those other names that we're not sure are still going to be there are the likes of Wavy Mambo, are the likes of Liam Talbot, who, yeah, play a major role in your rushing attack. Joey Zorn, Christopher John, those two alone, like, what a fascinating version of their careers it would have been if it were just those two. Like, we saw Joey Zorn go without a single touchdown this year, in large part, well, in part because the offense struggled, but as well because they have so many guys they can feed the ball to. For Queens to be able, we keep talking about this with some of these matchups, to be able to say, look, we have great defenders in our secondary, Keegan Vanek, Ashton Miller, Melanson, those great linebackers they have, to be able to say, look, just play back there, and our front seven, which is already so strong, we can now say, let's get a little more aggressive. Let's get a little more creative, knowing that we can have good coverage in the back end because we're not that scared of this passing attack. Man, oh man, that's going to be a major endeavor for this Windsor team in terms of how they're going to attack Queens defensively. Darian Newell in the middle, Silas Hubert, Van Wishart, your guy, Justin Pace, patrolling the middle. There's obviously, we're going to talk about some of the highlights for this Windsor team as well, and as well how we have some of those similar concerns, quite literally flipping the script, looking at where Queens is at right now. Just that piece alone, because I think we started our podcast before we recorded being like, are you quite sold on where you're going with this pick? Are you quite sold? Like, I'll finish by saying this, whichever way this game swings, I don't think we can call it an upset. As far as Queens is having to travel to go into Windsor's house, and I'm not necessarily declaring that as my pick right now, I don't think it's fair to call that an upset. Not to take away from Windsor, but again, it's a 5-4 seed. It's teams that are like Spider-Man meme of like pointing at each other like, hey, it's the same thing, right? That standpoint alone, there's other aspects to look at this game, but how Windsor is going to try to move the ball against this Queens defense that has been so good, and by the numbers, they're giving up only 25 points a game. I mean, Windsor's a few points ahead of them at 23 points a game, 22 points, pardon me. But just looking at that Windsor offense versus this Queens defense, it's gonna be a long day for them.
It has to be. It absolutely has to be. When you look at all of the strengths that this Queens team has versus the Windsor strength, certainly offensively and defensively, even in the first game, you look at this and you go, well, what Windsor still ran for 196 yards on the ground. Yeah, but when you really break it down, you start looking at, well, Joey Zorn had 9 attempts for 76 yards. Decent, don't get me wrong, but he does have a long in there of 56. And then your next highest rusher is Danny Skelton, who does a great job of getting out of the pocket and running downfield with one long of 16 and doing that, obviously, because he can't find anything down the middle. Wegby Mambo, 3 attempts for 42 yards. Christopher John, 6 attempts for 32 yards. And once again, Wegby Mambo, 3 attempts for 42 yards with a long of 42. meaning that everything else was either stuffed at the line or brought back. Christopher John, 6 attempts for 32 yards with a long at 20. So that's 5 attempts for 12 yards. This is a team that strives and that does very well in defending the run. You've got outstanding, the best defensive line that's out there in Silas Hubert, Darian Newell, Van Wishart, and Olivier Jackson, who's been playing on the defensive end, who I'm very high on. I really like what I've seen from that young man. And then, oh yeah, we got past them. Here's Liam Sutherland. Here's Justin Pace coming downhill to really lay the boom like we've seen this young man do. And so we've been saying it all year long. Windsor, is your quarterback play going to get better? Because if you want to be in the top tier of the OUA, it's going to have to be. Certainly, this is going to be a massive game. And like you said, this is a 4 seed versus a 5 seed. Whoever comes out of this one, this is not an upset by any means. There's a lot of similarities between these two in the fact that the strength of their team right now, I would say, is on the defense, certainly in the defensive secondary, or sorry, in the defensive front seven for both of these squads, and then a solid run game with quarterback play that hasn't exactly been consistent on both sides. So this is a very interesting look at this. If you flip the script and you go the other way and you start looking at the Queens offense against the Windsor defense, of course, we saw a prime example of what this Windsor defense is capable of doing in the first time that they played. And Mr. Springer there with 3 interceptions like you detailed, but Asibo Dotsi with another one. He's been playing very well. Once again, Jason Rashotzi now playing in starting at the will linebacker ever since the injury to their starting in Sal. I've loved what I've seen from this young man. We were really impressed with him last year when he was a rookie, and in a second-year player, he is playing outstanding. He's got solid run reads. He knows when to come up, and he's a solid tackler. But I certainly think that if you're trying to pick on anybody there, you got Devin Verisuk as a middle linebacker. You're not picking on him because he's one of the best in the league. But if anything, you might be trying to go after that will linebacker, seeing if you're going to do a trips to the boundary, see if you can't pull him out of the box and start asking him to cover a Nico Cuomo, a Nathan Falcone, or somebody else in that slot receiver aspect. Do you try to utilize that to get after him a little bit? Even if you do, Jason Rosazzi has fantastic speed. I think he can keep up with a lot of those dudes. So this is going to be a really good matchup, once again, because of the similarities like we just talked about.
Definitely. And you know what? Even if Queens is going to try and get creative to mess around a little bit with the box play for them, obviously last year it was the Kaladi, Amusin, and move the heck out of my way, Ageli show. But a guy that I don't know if we've talked about enough this year, who's had a really good job, I don't know if truly replacing Ageli, but fitting in on that interior of the D line, is one in Demir Tagani, who's again, from the interior, I believe his interior guy, picking up 4 sacks, going on top of Kaladi having 6.5 himself. You mentioned the guys like Devin Verisek, John, and Rashotzi, and again with Rashotzi, it's the double-edged sword of he's so aggressive, he plays so fast that you can probably target him of being one of those guys that we're going to put him in a bind where try to make him get caught up in his own excitement, at least from the way we look at it. But again, that I feel like last year it felt so special, really seeing that D line just go off. That without Ageli in there this year, we haven't talked about it as much. Obviously, Kaladi, whenever he's on the field, ISO cam right away. So that's one of the things that just for this defense, for Queens O-line, that as you mentioned, Jazz Kara was back last week. Very banged up. There's a double-edged sword to that too, where then again, even if they are a bit banged up with this one, they have a lot of guys who got live reps this year in high leverage games throughout the regular season. But nonetheless, from that standpoint, the same way, and though it's a Windsor off O-line that's really good, we can look at the front seven of Queens and say, man, you might probably give the nod to them on that side of the ball. So again, there's a lot of things that I think Queens can do in terms of taking advantage of some matchups and being able to give them the best ability to strike while the iron's hot. And whether it's in the passing game with Leo, or maybe it will be Vreekin out there, and however they're going to try and get it into their guys in Cuomo and Falcone's hands. At the end of the day, looking at this guy in Jared Kasari, finishing atop the league in rushes per game in a year where, you know, I think my way too early pick of saying this guy's who I'm calling for OU MVP probably fizzled out for a year where he plays in 7 games. So a whole game he misses, but we certainly know those 7 other games weren't always all right. You're our bell cow, as we know you are. You're getting the looks. What Jared Kasari is able to do, really, whether or not he's the getting 30 plus carries or whether he's getting 7 to 8 carries, just is so dynamic because as soon as he steps on the field, you just know that you have to game plan, you have to execute to slowing him down because his ability to run after contact, his ability to read his blocks, and we know that Queens uses their H backs to be able to give a variety of gaps for him to find. You talked about it last year, how spectacular his vision is and how just quickly that can frustrate a team. So with Leo in there, the biggest thing that I think gives you confidence is still just knowing that Kasari is that special because of that vision, because of how hard it is to take him down. And at this point in the year, like with all these teams, you can say the exact same thing about Zorn and like Christopher John and Liam Talbot and Mambo. If they're close, if you're close at this point, you're as good as 100%. But I'll just make the point using Kasari as the example to be able to say at this point, however that ankle's feeling, I'm sure they'll give him some Tortle, just whatever they got to put in his system so he doesn't feel a thing. It's the nature of football. It's kind of scary sometimes, but it's how we get down. The fact that he can just go into this game for the first time in I really don't know how long and just say, you just run and run hard. Not to say that he ever wasn't leading into this one, but again, it's playoff time and the notion of playoff Kasari. You can say the exact same thing with some of these other guys, but just with him being able to, with all the injuries he's dealt with for a running back dealing with an ankle injury of all things, I think that might be where Queens can really get, pardon the pun, talking about running backs, a leg up in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what Jared Kasari and his capabilities are, he has been a special player since day one, especially last year when we really saw him do his thing. And I have to assume that, like you mentioned, if there's any chance that he's going to be playing, he's going to be playing. And that ankle's going to be all taped up. And like you said, a couple of painkillers here and there, and you're ready to go. I'm really interested to see who else on this Queens O-line is going to be back. I've loved the play of the guys when they are in and when they are healthy, especially on that right side. Logan Thiessen at number 66 with the O-line swag that I called out earlier, looking like a real dog. And right tackle Nicholas Henning. He's been a stalwart on that O-line. I've really been impressed with the play ever since he transitioned from being a fullback into a proper offensive lineman. So I do think the world of these guys. It's just, how healthy are they really? Jazz Cairo came back at this left tackle spot. How healthy is he really? Or are you just trying to get him some reps to make sure that come playoff time, he's good to go and you're pushing things a little bit? So I'm really interested to see what those injuries look like. And then obviously on the other side, you detailed it beautifully previously. Wegby Mumbo and Liam Talbot, those are not just a couple of dudes. Those are key components of your offense, especially in Liam Talbot. The capabilities of this Windsor team and this Windsor offense skyrocket when Liam Talbot is healthy and ready to go because of all of the things that we've seen from him coming in and doing a jet sweep or going down the sidelines as a deep threat or whatever the case may be, just getting the ball in this young man's hands, even as a running back and using the shiftiness in the gap to get out there. So whoever is the healthiest in this game, I think is really what is going to come down to who's going to take the win on this one, because my goodness, when you look across the board and you say, yeah, you've got a Jared Kasari. Well, here's a Joey Zorn and a Christopher John who can easily do the same kind of stuff. And, you've got Nico Cuomo and you've got a Nathan Falcone. Well, here's Javoni Cunningham and here's Liam Talbot who can also make you pay from that standpoint as well. So what this is really going to come down to, and once again, go back to some of our things that we've said before, is those jump ball moments. How many of those jump ball moments are you going to be able to capture? Is Ian St. Arnaud going to take the game over
Yes.
and start going to the house? He didn't do it in the first game, but we've certainly seen him gain, if nothing else, more and more confidence as the game has have gone on, and the ability of any time I touch the ball, whether it's a punt return, kickoff return, or a missed field goal, especially, I have the capabilities to take this to the house, and all of my blockers in front of me feel the same way. So they're going to be working their tail off to try to make sure that I can do that. This is going to be a very tight game going into this one, my man.
It certainly is. And I love that you brought up Ian St. Arnaud, and just the matchup of him versus Javoni Cunningham is stellar. Obviously, they don't match up against one another. Well, actually, I guess they could, because Ian St. Arnaud plays defensive back and Cunningham. But as far as like stellar return guys, and you even look in the kicking game, Tyler Mullen for Queens, Brady Lister for Windsor. Both of them have 62 points on the year. It's like when you look at every single aspect of it, it's so hard to make one thing of it or the other. And then you could factor in, so if it feels so tight and it's a 4-5 matchup, and the matchup from week 1 was so tight, and you say, okay, does Windsor have have the advantage because Queens is going on the road? Certainly. And we know that weird stuff happens when you go to Windsor and try to play football there. You brought up the injury piece, and really, I do think it probably comes down to that. As you said, which of these two teams is trotting out the most fully functional version of their team? Yeah, if all of a sudden Talbot's out there, if Mambo's out there, if Nick Domovsky's out there, I certainly would be looking at this Windsor team and saying, man, oh man, that version of this team, I think, can make a lot of noise with how good that defense is. And all things considered, I'm so conflicted here, Tom, but at a certain point, you got to plug your nose and dive in. Give me the Golden Gales on the road, baby. Let's go with Queens here now, rolling into Win City. Man, this is going to be a beat 'em up physical game. That Ottawa Guelph game, I think, is going to be very pretty, beautiful football. Not that they can't dirty it up as well, but these great passing attacks, the secondaries, all these things. This game is going to be, it's like when you watch those videos of wherever in the world where it's just literally a slap fight, two massive dudes full-handed slap, then the other guy full-handed slap, and one of these guys is eventually going to keel over. That's a Queens Windsor game right now, and I'm taking Queens, giving them the old line from the Dave Chappelle show, what the five fingers say to the face, slap, and going in their house and pick up the win, advancing into the next round. I don't feel great about it, Tom, but at a certain point, you got to pick one of these teams. And as we talked about on the last pod, over the decade, Queens has been one of the best teams, and that's irrefutable. I don't know if you're ready for your pick, if that's where you want to be going, but I had to get the monkey off my back there. Just do it. Where are you going, my friend?
When you look at the regular season, when you see teams playing in the regular season, you have to say, now looking at playoffs, who got better? How much better did each team get into this one? When you look at these, you say, I absolutely think that the Queens defense got better. I think even despite the fact of, the last couple of games that have been high scoring, I still think that Windsor defense has certainly gotten better. Special teams wise, I'm giving that edge to Queens 100%. Offensively, I'm giving that edge to Queens. My pick, I'm giving that edge to Queens. I'm taking the Golden Gales in this one as well. I don't think that Danny Skelton is going to be able to win this game. I think the big factor in the very first week, in week 1, that caused Queens to lose is those 4 interceptions that Alex freaking threw. And like I mentioned, even with those 4, only a 4-point difference in the game in this one. I think another thing that I briefly mentioned, but getting into as well, that was Coach Nez, our guy, Coach Nez, his first game back as the OC. And despite how close he was to the offense, obviously being the O-line coach last year with Coach Flax, it's one thing to be real close. It's another thing to be the guy making the calls. I think he got off a lot of rust in that one. Not to say that he made bad calls by any means, but he got off the rust in that one. He's been calling a great game, especially with a guy in Anthony Leo, who once again, he's a backup quarterback in no disrespect to the young man whatsoever, but if Alex Vreekin is healthy, Vreekin is starting. A backup quarterback who, by all the numbers, has been playing solid football, smart football. Jared Kasari, who's been leaned on in the right scenarios to really take a game over, and he has been doing that. And seeing the resurgence of the receiving core and really seeing them get a chance to really make plays, I like this Queens team. I think that defense comes to play. Give me the Golden Gales to go down to the Golden Arches and still win.
Oh my goodness. Against the blue collar and gold swagger. It's a full gold affair happening from Win City, which is a 3:00 start as well. It's the only non-1:00 start for our quarterfinal weekend, but that is our preview of the quarterfinal weekend. Again, it's Mac at Western, Ottawa at Guelph, and Queens at Windsor. Tom and I are aligned in all three of the picks, going Western at home, Guelph at home, and taking Queens on the road. Tom, final thoughts to you before we say adieu to the fine folks tuning in and, get ready for some action.
This has the capabilities to be the best week of football with all of these teams here. I'm a little nervous about Western Mac because, like I mentioned, if there's anything that could happen, it might be another Western blowout. I don't think that that's going to be the case. I think Mac really comes to play in this one, but I really believe between Guelph, Ottawa, and Windsor, Queens, we are going to see some of the best games that we've seen all year long in the highest of stakes in the playoffs in this one. So, my goodness, I don't know what you're doing on a Saturday at 1:00 and at 3:00, but tune in, whether you tune into the stream on OUA.TV on those streams, or even better, get your butt in the stands because these are going to be must-see football from outstanding teams here. So, wow, we've still got outstanding football, even though the regular season is done.
It quite literally only gets better from here as the cream of the crop rises to the top. And if you're going to get your butt in a seat at a stand and it happens to be in the Royal City, come find me and Tom because we will be there. Be more than happy to chop it up with you about this, that, and the third. And in the event that at least two of our predictions come wrong, Tom, and your McMaster Marauders pull up the upset of upsets in London, and my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everybody's Guelph Griffins fall to Ottawa. If both those things happen, this might be the last time you hear my voice on a podcast talking about OUA football. I might evaporate into thin air, but that's what you get being a fan of OUA football because these teams are so good and the emotional stakes are so heavy when you follow it like we do in the connections we have with these teams. Tom, outstanding job by you as always to everyone tuning in, either just to the audio on the podcast, watching via YouTube, or any clips that make their way out there into the internet's space. Thank you as always for the journey you have, for continuing with us on this journey into the playoffs. It's win or go home time. It's the quarterfinals of the 2024 season. I cannot wait to be there with you, Tom, in Guelph, watching this heck of a matchup, catching up on all these other games, and one way or the other, you'll hear us breaking them down. Coming up next week, right here at the 55.